The morning sun had barely risen when David left his small rented room. His boots were worn, his shirt had faded from years of use, but his spirit still carried a quiet strength. He worked at a construction site on the edge of the city, where the days were long, the pay was small, and the noise never stopped. Every morning he'd walk to the bus terminal with his lunch packed in a plastic box and a thermos of tea that his mother always made before sunrise. David wasn't a man who talked much. People at the site said he was kind but reserved, the kind of person who helped quietly and never asked for anything in return. He lived with his mother and younger sister in a small apartment that always smelled of fresh bread. His mother sold homemade snacks to neighbors, and his sister was still in school, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. David carried the weight of the family on his shoulders without complaint, though he often worried about how long he could keep things going. That morning felt like any other day. The air was cool and the city was slowly waking up. The terminal was crowded as always, with people rushing to buses, vendors shouting prices, and horns echoing from every direction. David stood in line, holding his small bag, waiting for his turn to buy a ticket. Then something caught his attention. Near the counter, a young man was arguing with the cashier. His clothes were clean but simple, and there was a stack of papers in his hands. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Please, sir, I just need a few more minutes. I'll get the money. I promise," the young man pleaded. The cashier, tired and impatient, shook his head. "I can't hold your seat. Either you pay now or step aside. There are other people waiting." David looked closer and saw the panic in the young man's eyes. He looked no older than 20, maybe just finished school. His hands shook as he searched his pockets again, pulling out a few coins, not enough to cover the fare. A few people behind him sighed loudly. Someone muttered, "If you can't afford the ticket, don't waste our time." The young man's face turned red with embarrassment. He clutched his papers tightly and whispered, "I have to reach the college today. It's my last chance to pay my admission fee. Please, I can't lose this opportunity." The cashier was unmoved. "Next person," he barked, waving for the line to move. David stepped forward slowly. Something in that boy's voice reminded him of his sister. The same kind of hope and desperation that only comes when dreams are on the line. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the few bills in his pocket. They were supposed to cover his lunch for the week. But something in him wouldn't let him walk away. He placed the money on the counter and said quietly, "Add his fare to mine." The boy turned, startled. "Sir, no, you don't have to." "It's all right," David said, giving him a small smile. "Just get your seat before they close the counter." The cashier took the money and printed both tickets without another word. The young man stared at David, unsure how to react. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't even know your name." David picked up his bag. "Names don't matter. Just make sure you get to that college," he replied, walking away before the boy could say more. The young man stood there for a few seconds, speechless, then clutched his ticket like it was gold. His eyes followed David until he disappeared into the crowd. As David boarded his bus, he didn't think much of what had just happened. To him, it was a small thing, just helping someone who needed a hand. He'd done it before for coworkers or neighbors. Life was already tough for everyone. If he could make someone's day a little easier, he felt it was worth it. The ride to the construction site was long and bumpy. David sat by the window, watching the city fade into stretches of open land and half-built buildings. His thoughts drifted to his family. His mother's health had been fragile lately. The medicine costs worried him, but he kept those worries to himself. His sister had her final exams coming up, and he promised to buy her new notebook soon. At work, the noise of drilling and hammering filled the air. David put on his helmet and got to work without delay. The foreman nodded at him approvingly. "Always on time, huh?" he said. David smiled faintly. "Someone has to be." The hours passed slowly under the burning sun. Sweat trickled down his back and dust clung to his face. But even on the hardest days, David never complained. During lunch break, he sat on a pile of cement bags and ate his simple meal: rice and beans, a small apple, and tea from his thermos. His friend at the site, an older man named Luis, joined him. "You know," Luis said, "people like you don't exist much anymore. I saw you give your seat to that old lady yesterday on the bus. Why do you always do these things?" David shrugged. "Maybe because someone once did the same for me. I was young and broke, just like that boy this morning. A stranger helped me once. I guess I'm just returning the favor. Luis nodded slowly, taking a sip from his water bottle. Still, kindness like that? It always finds a way back to you. David smiled but didn't reply. He didn't help people expecting anything in return. To him, it was just the right thing to do. As the day ended, the sky turned orange and the workers began packing up. David's back ached and his hands were sore, but he felt a quiet sense of peace. He didn't know why, but that morning's small encounter lingered in his mind. The boy's eyes, filled with hope and fear, had left an impression. He wondered if the young man had reached his college on time. When he got home that evening, the smell of his mother's cooking filled the air. His sister ran up to him, waving her test paper. "Look, I got full marks," she said proudly. David smiled and ruffled her hair. "I knew you would," he said. His mother looked tired but happy. "You should eat before you sleep," she said softly. "You work too hard, my son." He nodded and sat at the small table. They talked about small things: the neighbors, school, and the rising cost of groceries. David didn't mention the boy or the money he'd spent. He didn't think it mattered. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, he thought again about the boy at the terminal. Maybe the boy would remember that moment. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, it didn't matter. David smiled faintly, closed his eyes, and drifted off to sleep, not knowing that the small kindness he had shown would one day return to him in ways he could never imagine. Meanwhile, far across the city, the young man sat in his hostel room, staring at his college admission slip, his eyes filled with tears. If it weren't for that stranger, he would have lost his place. He didn't know how to thank him or even find him. But deep down he made a promise that if life ever gave him the chance, he would repay that kindness, not to the same man perhaps, but to someone else who needed it. He didn't know the man's name, but he would never forget his face. That night, both men, one sleeping in a tiny apartment, the other in a shared dorm room, drifted into dreams filled with hope. One believed he had only helped a stranger. The other believed he had met an angel in disguise. And somewhere in the quiet space between those two lives, fate began to write a new story. One that neither of them could have predicted. A story that began with a small act of kindness at a crowded bus terminal. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that morning slowly faded from David's mind. Life moved on the way it always did. Work, bills, and family. His world revolved around the same rhythm of early mornings and late evenings. Yet in another part of the city, that small act of kindness he had shown was shaping someone else's life in a way he could never imagine. The young man he had helped, whose name was Ethan, carried that moment in his heart every single day. The bus ride to the college that morning felt different for him. The city outside the window seemed brighter, the noise of traffic less annoying. He sat quietly, holding his admission papers tightly against his chest, afraid that if he let go, the dream might vanish. He couldn't stop thinking about the man who had stepped forward without hesitation. He hadn't even asked for a name, a reason, or a thank you. Ethan had met many people in his life, but never anyone like that. For someone like him, coming from a small village and struggling to survive in the city, that moment meant everything. When he reached the college, he ran straight to the office and paid his admission fee. The woman at the counter smiled as she stamped the papers. "You made it just in time," she said. Ethan's hands trembled as he took the receipt. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If that man hadn't appeared at the terminal, he would have missed the deadline and lost his chance forever. That night, he sat on the edge of his narrow hostel bed, looking up at the ceiling. "Whoever you are," he whispered, "I don't know your name, but I'll never forget you. I'll make something of my life because of you. I promise." Years started to pass and life began to change for both men. Ethan worked hard in college. He wasn't the smartest in his class, but he had something others didn't, a sense of purpose that burned like fire. Every exam, every project, every sleepless night reminded him of the man at the terminal. Whenever he felt like giving up, he would picture that stranger's face and hear those simple words. "Names don't matter. Just make sure you get to that college." Ethan kept that promise close to his heart. He studied late into the night, often skipping meals just to save money. He worked part-time in a repair shop, fixing computers and cleaning floors to pay for his books. The owner of the shop liked him and often said, "You've got something special, kid. You'll go far." And he did. After 4 long years, Ethan graduated with top marks in his engineering class. On graduation day, as he stood among hundreds of students wearing gowns and caps, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are. This one's for you." But as Ethan's life began to rise, David seemed to stand still. He still worked at the construction site, now as a senior worker. His body had grown stronger, but his hands were rough and his back ached often. The company wasn't doing well, and rumors of layoffs were spreading among the workers. Still, David showed up every morning on time, ready to work. His mother's health had started to decline, medicine costs were increasing, and his sister had just started college. He felt proud of her, but also worried about how to afford her tuition. Some nights he sat alone on the balcony sipping tea, staring at the city lights, wondering if life would ever get easier. He had almost forgotten that morning at the terminal. He never saw the young man again and assumed that he had just gone on with his life. But somewhere deep inside, David still believed in kindness. He didn't have much to give, but whatever he had, he shared. He helped an old man carry groceries, lent a few coins to a coworker, or bought snacks for the kids playing in the street. People often told him, "You're too kind for this world." But David would smile and say, "Maybe the world just needs a little more of it." Meanwhile, Ethan's journey was moving fast. After graduation, he got a job at a small tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. He worked day and night, learning everything he could. His passion for technology and problem-solving quickly caught the attention of his supervisors. Within a few years, he rose through the ranks, but no matter how successful he became, he never forgot his roots, or the man who made his dreams possible. He kept replaying that moment in his head, the man's calm voice, his tired but kind eyes, the quiet way he walked away. Ethan didn't even know his name, but he remembered his face perfectly. One evening, Ethan was sitting in his small apartment, looking at his first paycheck as a project manager. It wasn't a huge amount, but to him it felt like a mountain of hope. He smiled and whispered to himself, "If that man could see me now." He decided that night that someday, when he had enough, he would dedicate his success to helping others, just as someone once helped him. Time passed, and both men continued on their paths. David's life grew tougher as the construction company eventually shut down. The announcement came suddenly one afternoon. The foreman called everyone together and told them the bad news. "We're closing down. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." David stood silently among the workers, his helmet hanging in his hand. There was no anger in his face, just quiet acceptance. He knew life had never been easy, and it wasn't about to start now. That evening, he went home with heavy steps. He didn't tell his mother right away. He didn't want to worry her. For the next few months, he took small repair jobs around the neighborhood. He fixed leaking pipes, painted walls, and even did some cleaning work. The money was just enough to get by. Some days, when he had nothing, he'd sit at the bus terminal again, watching people come and go. He liked the noise, the movement. It reminded him that life never stayed still. He didn't know that somewhere across town, Ethan was building a company of his own. After years of hard work and saving, he started a small tech firm with a few friends. They developed software for local businesses and slowly began to grow. It wasn't easy, but Ethan had learned to stay patient. On quiet nights when he worked late at the office, Ethan would sometimes remember that morning at the terminal. He wondered where that man might be now. Was he happy? Did he ever think about what had happened? He wished there was a way to find him, to tell him that his kindness had built more than a career. It had built a life. Back in David's small apartment, the days were simple but filled with quiet determination. His sister had started working part-time as a tutor to help with expenses. His mother's smile, though weak, still gave him strength. Even when he had nothing left in his pocket, David believed that good things could happen to good people, even if they took time. One evening, as rain poured down outside, David sat by the window, staring at the city lights reflecting on wet streets. He thought about how life always seemed to test him, yet never completely broke him. Somewhere deep down, he still felt that small spark of hope, the belief that kindness would return in unexpected ways. On that same night, Ethan was finalizing plans to open a new office in another part of the city. His company had grown beyond what he ever imagined. As he signed the documents, he smiled to himself. He didn't know that the address of that new office was just a few blocks away from where David lived. Fate was quietly weaving their stories together again, setting the stage for something remarkable. Both men, unaware of the connection that still bound them, went to sleep under the same city sky. One carried gratitude that never faded, and the other carried faith that never died. Neither of them knew that soon their paths would cross once more, and this time it wouldn't be by chance. The morning was quiet when David woke up. The sky was covered with soft clouds, and the sound of light rain came through the open window. He sat up slowly, stretching his tired arms. His body ached from the small jobs he had been doing lately, painting, repairing doors, carrying heavy tools. Each day was a struggle, but he kept moving because stopping was not an option. He made tea in a small pot and poured it into an old cup that had a crack on the side. His mother was still asleep, and his sister had already left for her tutoring job. As he sipped the warm tea, he thought about how things had changed. The construction site was gone, the steady pay was gone, and with every passing week, hope seemed to slip further away. Still, David refused to give up. Later that morning, he went out to look for work. The streets were wet, and buses splashed water as they passed. He walked past shops and buildings, reading every notice board he could find. Most of them were old or already torn down by the wind. Then something caught his eye. On a bright new poster taped to a wall, bold letters read, "Hiring maintenance staff, Bright Future Technologies. Apply today." David paused for a moment, reading the details carefully. The company name was unfamiliar to him, but something about it felt different. It wasn't a construction site, it was a clean, modern office. He thought maybe it was time to try something new. After all, he had spent his whole life fixing and building things. How hard could maintenance be? He took a deep breath and memorized the address. The office was in a new business district on the other side of the city. He decided to go the next morning. That night, he told his mother about it while they were having dinner. "It's not construction, but maybe it's something better," he said, trying to sound confident. His mother smiled weakly. "You've always found a way, son. Maybe this is the chance you've been waiting for." The next morning, David wore his cleanest clothes, a simple shirt and pressed pants. They weren't new, but they looked neat. He combed his hair, packed his papers, and left early to make sure he wouldn't be late. When he reached the office building, he was surprised. It was tall and modern, with glass walls that reflected the morning light. The company's name was written in shining letters above the entrance, Bright Future Technologies. He took a deep breath and walked inside. The receptionist greeted him politely. "Good morning, sir. Are you here for the maintenance position?" "Yes," he replied, handing over his papers. "Please take a seat. Someone from HR will call you shortly." David sat in the waiting area, surrounded by other applicants. Some were younger, dressed in suits and holding smartphones. He felt slightly out of place but kept calm. He knew he had experience, even if it wasn't from fancy offices. As he waited, his eyes wandered around the building. The floors were shiny, the air smelled clean, and the walls were lined with photographs of smiling employees. He could tell this company was doing well. For a moment, he imagined himself working here, earning enough to give his family a comfortable life again. After a while, a woman called his name. "Mr. David, please come in." He stood up quickly and followed her into a large office. She asked him a few questions about his past work, fixing machines, handling repairs, keeping things clean and running. He answered honestly and confidently. The interview went smoothly, but at the end she said, "You'll have to wait for the final round with the company founder. He likes to meet all new hires personally." David nodded, not thinking much of it. He had no idea who the founder was. A few minutes later, the door opened and a young man walked in wearing a dark blue suit. He looked calm and confident, but as soon as his eyes met David's, something changed. He stopped walking. David stood up out of respect, not realizing who he was looking at. The young man's eyes widened. His heart raced as memories flooded back. The crowded terminal, the sound of arguing, and the kind face of a stranger who had paid his bus fare years ago. He could never forget that moment, and now that face stood right before him. For a second, he couldn't speak. The woman in HR looked at him, confused. "Sir, this is Mr. David applying for the maintenance position." The young man, Ethan, forced a smile and nodded. "Thank you, you can leave us for a moment." When the woman stepped out, silence filled the room. David looked uncertain. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked gently. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, you didn't, I just—" He paused, still in disbelief. "You don't remember me, do you?" David looked puzzled. I'm sorry, sir, have we met before? Ethan smiled, his eyes softening. Years ago, at a bus terminal. You paid for a stranger's fare because he couldn't afford his college fee. David's face changed. He blinked a few times, trying to remember. And then it came back to him, the young boy with papers in his hands pleading at the counter. That was you? He asked, almost whispering. Ethan nodded. That was me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt heavy with emotion. David finally said, I didn't even think you'd remember that. It was such a small thing. Ethan shook his head. Small? That moment changed my entire life. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to pay my admission fee. I wouldn't be standing here today. You didn't just pay for a bus ride, you gave me my future. David didn't know what to say. He felt a lump in his throat and his eyes began to sting. I just did what anyone would have done, he murmured. No, Ethan said firmly, stepping closer. Not everyone would have done that. Most people walked away, but you didn't. There was a long silence before Ethan spoke again, his voice filled with gratitude. You helped me when I was no one. Now it's my turn to help you. David frowned slightly. Sir, please don't feel like you owe me anything. I just need honest work. Ethan smiled warmly. And that's exactly what you'll get. But not as a maintenance worker. David looked confused. I don't understand. Ethan walked over to his desk, picked up a folder, and handed it to him. This company wouldn't exist if not for you. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. I want you to work here, but not cleaning floors or fixing wires. I want you to manage our maintenance team. You'll have people working under you. The salary will be much higher than what this role offers. David was speechless. He looked down at the folder, then back at Ethan. This is too much, he whispered. Ethan shook his head. It's not enough. You gave me hope when I didn't have any. This is just life's way of completing the circle. David tried to hold back his tears, but one slipped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away and smiled faintly. You've done well, kid, he said softly. I'm proud of you. Ethan smiled back. I wouldn't have done it without you. That evening, as David walked home with the offer letter in his hand, the city lights looked brighter than ever. For the first time in years, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He couldn't wait to tell his mother and sister. When he reached home, his mother noticed the spark in his eyes. Something good happened today? She asked. David smiled and nodded. Yes, Ma, something very good. He didn't tell her everything, at least not yet. He just sat at the table looking at the letter again and again, feeling grateful. Somewhere deep in his heart, he finally understood what people meant when they said kindness comes back. Years ago, he had helped a boy at a bus terminal without thinking. He never expected anything in return. But fate had a quiet way of remembering. As he looked out of the window that night, watching the rain fall softly over the city, David whispered to himself, maybe this is how life works. One small act can change everything. And miles away in his office, Ethan sat by his desk smiling to himself. He knew this was just the beginning of something greater. Both men, once strangers connected by chance, were about to build something together, something far more powerful than either of them could have imagined. The next morning, David woke up before sunrise just as he always did, but something about the day felt different. For years he had risen to prepare for another hard day under the sun, but this time it wasn't the sound of tools or machinery waiting for him. It was a new beginning, one that still didn't feel completely real. He put on the cleanest shirt he owned and carefully ironed it until the collar sat just right. His sister smiled as she handed him his lunchbox. You look nervous, she teased softly. He smiled back, trying to hide his anxiety. It's been a while since I had to work in an office. I just hope I don't mess anything up. His mother, sitting by the window, gave him a reassuring look. You won't. You've worked hard all your life. This time life is finally giving you what you deserve. David nodded and left the house with a deep breath. The air felt fresh and the morning traffic hummed around him. He took the same bus he used to take years ago to the construction site, but today, his destination was a tall glass building that stood proudly in the heart of the city. When he entered Bright Future Technologies, people greeted him politely. The reception area felt welcoming, filled with light and the soft buzz of computers. For the first time in a long time, David felt like he belonged somewhere better. A young woman guided him through the building, showing him his new office, a small but neat room near the maintenance section. There was a desk with his nameplate already placed on it. Seeing his name written there brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Later that morning, Ethan came by to check in on him. He was dressed neatly, his usual calm smile on his face. "How's the first day going?" he asked. David stood up quickly. "Good, sir. Everyone's been very kind. I'm still learning my way around." Ethan chuckled softly. "You don't have to call me sir, you can just call me Ethan. And if you need anything at all, my door is always open." David nodded. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough for all this." Ethan looked at him with sincerity. "You already did years ago. I'm just returning the favor." For a moment, both men stood in silence, smiling. There was no need for more words. Some feelings were too deep to be described. Over the next few weeks, David settled into his new role. He supervised the maintenance team, made sure everything in the building ran smoothly, and occasionally fixed things himself when needed. The younger workers respected him quickly because of his calm nature and strong work ethic. He never raised his voice, but when he spoke, people listened. Every day, Ethan would pass by and greet him. Sometimes they would share lunch in the cafeteria. They talked about work, life, and how unpredictable the world could be. One afternoon, as they sat together by the large windows overlooking the city, Ethan said quietly, "You know, for years, I wanted to find you. I didn't know your name, where you lived, or even if you'd still remember me. I searched through records, asked people at the terminal, but nothing worked." David smiled. "It's strange, isn't it? How life has a way of bringing people back together when it's meant to happen." Ethan nodded. "It really is. When I saw you walk into that interview room, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It felt like fate itself was standing there." David chuckled softly. Maybe fate just remembered that I still had a good deed waiting to return. As the weeks passed, Ethan learned more about David's life. He found out about his mother's illness, his sister's college struggles, and the sacrifices David had made to keep his family afloat. Each story made Ethan admire him even more. One day, after hearing that David's mother's medicine had become too expensive, Ethan quietly made a call to a doctor he knew. He arranged for her to get her prescriptions at no cost, but he didn't tell David it was his doing. He didn't want him to feel indebted. He only wanted to help the man who had once helped him. David noticed the sudden relief his mother felt and was grateful, though he didn't question how it happened. He simply said, "Maybe God's hand is finally turning things in our favor." At work, David's natural leadership began to shine. He organized the maintenance team so efficiently that the office started running smoother than ever. Ethan noticed the change and often told others, "You see that man? He's the reason this place runs without a hitch." But to David, it was never about recognition. He still lived simply, saved most of his earnings, and helped his sister with her education. In the evenings, he would sit by his mother's bedside, talking about his day at work, sharing stories about the new people he met. One rainy evening, after everyone had left the office, David stayed late to fix a faulty generator in the basement. Ethan, who was still upstairs finishing paperwork, decided to check on him. When he reached the basement, he found David working quietly, his sleeves rolled up, sweat on his forehead. "Still here?" Ethan asked, smiling. David looked up and grinned. "Old habits die hard. I can't leave a broken thing alone." Ethan laughed and leaned against the wall. "You remind me of myself back in college. I used to stay up fixing old computers when everyone else was asleep." David tightened the last bolt and switched the generator on. The lights flickered, then glowed brightly. He stood up and said, "There, all done." Ethan clapped lightly. "You've got the magic touch, as always." They walked out together under the sound of rain hitting the roof. On their way to the exit, Ethan suddenly said, "You know, I never told you this, but when you helped me that day, I was ready to give up. My father had passed away, I had no one to turn to, and that college admission was my only hope. If I had lost it, I don't know where I'd be today." David looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes all someone needs is a little push. You were meant to do great things, Ethan. I just helped you catch the bus." Ethan smiled, but his eyes softened. "You didn't just help me catch a bus, David, you helped me catch my life." Those words stayed with both of them for a long time. Weeks later, Ethan decided to hold a company dinner to celebrate the firm's growth. The entire staff was invited. David arrived in his usual modest clothes, slightly nervous amid the crowd of sharply dressed professionals. When Ethan went up on stage to give his speech, he began talking about how far the company had come. But then his tone changed. He looked out into the crowd and said, "Before we enjoy the evening, I want to share a story. Not about business, but about kindness." Everyone grew quiet as he began to tell the story of the man at the bus terminal who had helped him when he was young and broke. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, remembering every detail, the desperation, the kindness, and the moment that changed his life. By the time he finished, many in the audience were moved. Ethan then smiled and said, "That man is sitting among us tonight. He's not just part of this company, he's the reason this company exists. Please give your applause to Mr. David." The room erupted with applause. David stood frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Ethan walked up to him, took his hand, and raised it high. "This man taught me that one act of kindness can build a lifetime of hope." David could barely speak. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. Ethan smiled. "I wanted everyone to know who the real hero is." That night, as they left the hall together, David looked at Ethan and said quietly, "You've given me more than I ever expected. You've given me pride." Ethan shook his head. "You gave me life, David. This is just me saying thank you." The city lights glowed around them as they walked toward the parking area. For a moment, neither spoke. They both knew that life had come full circle, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet, meaningful one. As David looked up at the stars that night, he thought of how strange life could be. A single moment, a small choice, had connected two souls forever. He smiled and whispered to himself, "Sometimes helping a stranger is really just helping your future." And somewhere deep inside, he knew his story was far from over. A few days after the company dinner, the story that Ethan had shared began to spread beyond the walls of Bright Future Technologies. One of the employees had recorded part of Ethan's speech on their phone and uploaded it online with a simple caption, "A billionaire honors the man who once changed his life." Within hours, the clip started gaining attention. By the next morning, it had millions of views. People were touched by the story of a humble security guard who had once helped a struggling student, not knowing that student would become a powerful businessman one day. Comments poured in from all over the world, praising both men, the one who showed kindness when he had little, and the one who never forgot where he came from. At first, David didn't even know about the video. He wasn't active on social media and rarely checked the news. It was his sister who ran into his room, holding her phone and saying, "You're on the internet. Everyone's talking about you." He frowned in confusion. "What do you mean everyone's talking about me?" She showed him the video. There he was, standing awkwardly beside Ethan as the crowd cheered, his face red with surprise. The caption beneath read, "The billionaire who thanked a security guard who once helped him." David watched quietly, his heart pounding. It felt strange seeing himself on so many screens. His mother smiled gently from her chair. "You see, son, sometimes good deeds travel further than you can imagine." Over the next few days, reporters began showing up near his house. Some wanted interviews, others wanted photos. David tried to stay polite but didn't like the attention. He told them softly, "I just did what anyone should do. I'm no hero." But the world thought otherwise. People were deeply moved by how he had helped someone without expecting anything in return. News channels replayed the story again and again. Talk shows discussed it. Schools even used it as an example of kindness. Meanwhile, Ethan's company received countless messages of appreciation. Clients wrote to him saying how inspired they were by his gratitude. Employees said they felt proud to work for someone with such a heart. One morning, Ethan walked into David's office holding a newspaper. "You made the front page," he said with a smile. David looked at the headline, "Security Officer's Good Deed Goes Viral After Billionaire Reveals His Identity." He sighed softly. "I never wanted fame. I just wanted to live quietly." Ethan nodded. "I know. But sometimes the world needs stories like yours. It reminds people that kindness still exists." David thought for a moment, and then smiled. "If that's true, then I'm glad it happened." That same week, a local TV station invited both of them for a special segment. David hesitated at first, but Ethan convinced him to go. "It's not about us," Ethan said. "It's about showing people that one small act can change a life." When they arrived at the studio, the lights, cameras, and crowd made David nervous. But when the interviewer asked him how he felt about everything, his answer was simple. "I never thought I was doing something special," he said. "I just saw someone who needed help. I didn't think about what I had to gain. I just did what felt right. Maybe that's what the world needs more of. People who do good without asking why." The audience applauded warmly. After the interview aired, David started receiving messages from strangers all over the world. Students, workers, single parents, even business owners. They all wrote about how his story inspired them to help others. One man wrote, "Your kindness made me help an old man fix his tire today." Another said, "I forgave someone I hadn't spoken to in years because of your story." Each message touched David deeply. He realized that his small act had sparked something much larger than he could have imagined. Back at work, things slowly returned to normal. David went back to managing the maintenance team, fixing small issues around the building, and greeting everyone with a kind smile. But people treated him differently now, not because he was famous, but because they respected him deeply. One afternoon, Ethan called him into his office. "I've been thinking," Ethan said. "Your story has reached so many people, and I want to do something that honors that spirit." David tilted his head curiously. "What do you mean?" Ethan smiled. "I'm starting a foundation. It'll help students from low-income families just like I once was. We'll call it the Helping Hand Project. I want you to help me run it." David's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know anything about foundations or charities," Ethan chuckled. "You know everything about kindness. That's all that matters. I'll handle the paperwork. You handle the people." For a moment, David couldn't find words. "I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Ethan replied warmly. David finally nodded. "All right then. Yes." And just like that, a new chapter began. The foundation quickly took shape. They started small, offering scholarships, providing school supplies, and helping families who were struggling. David visited schools personally, spoke to students, and told them his story. His simple words carried more weight than any formal speech could. One day, he visited a small school in a quiet neighborhood. The children gathered around him, curious and full of energy. A young boy raised his hand and asked, "Sir, why did you help that man when you didn't know him?" David smiled and said gently, "Because helping someone is never about who they are. It's about who you choose to be." The children clapped, and the teachers thanked him for his words. As David left the school, he looked back and saw the students waving. In that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep sense of peace. Months passed, and the foundation grew. Media outlets continued to follow their journey, but David never let fame change him. He still took the bus, still stopped to chat with neighbors, and still made time for his mother and sister. His mother, whose health had started to improve, often said, "You gave kindness to one person, and now it's coming back to you from the whole world." David would just smile and reply, "Maybe kindness is like a circle, it always finds its way back." One evening, as he and Ethan stood outside the new foundation office, watching the city lights, Ethan said quietly, "Do you ever think about that day at the bus terminal?" David chuckled. "Every now and then. I still can't believe it led us here." Ethan nodded. "It taught me something I'll never forget. Money can build buildings, but kindness builds hearts." They stood there in silence for a while, both reflecting on how life had brought them full circle. Eventually, Ethan turned to David. "You know, people always ask me what success means. I used to think it was money or power or fame. But now I know it's about being remembered for what you gave, not what you earned." David looked at him with a smile. "Then I guess you're one of the richest men alive." Ethan laughed softly. "Only because I met someone who showed me what true wealth looks like." The night air was cool, and the city hummed quietly below them. For both men, it wasn't about the fame, the headlines, or the applause anymore. It was about the journey that started with a single act of kindness, and how that act had changed not just 2 lives, but countless others. As the years went by, the Helping Hand Project continued to grow. Thousands of students were able to go to school, find jobs, and build better lives for their families. Each time someone asked how it all started, David would smile and say, with a bus ticket and a helping hand. He never forgot where he came from, and Ethan never forgot who helped him rise. The world eventually moved on to new stories, but their friendship remained strong. Every week they still met for coffee, laughed about old times, and talked about new dreams. Sometimes when David walked home in the evening, he would see strangers helping each other on the street, someone offering a ride, someone paying for another's meal, and he would think, maybe that's the real reward, not money, not fame, but knowing that goodness still lives in people's hearts. And so, the man who once gave away his bus fare ended up changing lives in ways he could never have imagined. His story became a reminder that no act of kindness is ever too small, and that sometimes, helping a stranger can turn into the greatest story of your life. As David looked at the stars one last time before heading inside, he smiled softly and whispered, "If the world remembers me for anything, I hope it's for being kind." And with that he walked home peaceful, grateful, and proud of the simple good deed that started it all.